Hi, it's Dwyer, GamblersAdvisory.com, DwyerVIP.com. Look us up in the sports section on Roku. We're there. Dwyer Boxing and Sports News. Also, if you look in the description to this video, you'll actually see an audio feed. Now you can just download the audio feeds online if you don't like this great background behind me, or if you don't like the visual that I'm putting forward. Okay, just remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Now you have a major fight coming up. Major. Right? It's in the heavyweight division. That's how big it is. It's a WBC heavyweight elimination match. Now, many fans don't know it. The WBC champion is Bryant. But understand the WBC is actually having an elimination contest, right? To decide who faces the winner of Stavern against Deontay Wilder, right? So this fight, the one I'm going to talk about here, pitches unbeaten Mike Perez against unbeaten Bryant Jennings for the right to fight the WBC heavyweight champion. Now let me say, and I'll get into the reasons why a little bit later, but understand, right? I like Bryant Jennings in the fight. It's more of a lean than a strong conviction. Proceed at your own risk. Understand this is high risk in a fight involving two unbeatens. Now, before I get into this, let me introduce you to some of the major players in the sport who, for whatever reason, don't always appear on boxing websites or on page one of the public consciousness here. Now let's talk about promoters in the sport. You may have heard of Top Rank, Golden Boy, Main Events, Lou DiBella, Eddie Hearn, Dan Goosen, Frank Warren, Mayweather Promotions. It's my understanding that none of them are involved in this promotion. Right? Understand this promotion actually highlights a set of different promoters who you need to know about because they're also major players in the sport of boxing. Right? Keep in mind, this is a heavyweight elimination match between two unbeatens taking place at Madison Square Garden. Right? And those promoters are K2 Promotions. By the way, the Ks are Vitaly Klitschko and Vladimir Klitschko. Right? In other words, in boxing, and only in boxing, can a heavyweight champion actually have a part promotionally in a fight taking place in his division in which he's not one of the guys fighting. Right? Welcome to the Alice in Wonderland world of this sport. Now, in addition to K2 Promotions, you have Gary Shaw Productions. And you also have Antonio Leonard Promotions. Now, you may not have heard of these names. They may not leap to the imagination as soon as you hear them. But understand they've been involved in some of the biggest fights in the sport's history, including the Castillo-Diego Corrales classics. Right? Now understand, let me just say this to young fighters. You have choices. Right? The world is not carved up into one or two promotional outfits. Right? In a glamour division like the heavyweight division, you have other repeat players with a lot of power and experience out there. So I want young fighters to consider exploring their options, right? Don't sign the first contract you're offered. Have your manager do his job. In fact, you might even want to, right, not sign an exclusive deal with a promoter for maximum flexibility. Just understand, for even big fights like this one, you have choices. Your promoters don't have to be the 2 or 3 that are the most known. Now let me mention managers for a second, because I believe it needs to be mentioned. Every other day I get emails about Al Heyman. Right? You would think that Al Heyman, and don't get me wrong, Al Heyman has a great reputation. Right? I'm sure Al Heyman does a great job. But people act as if Al Heyman is the only manager in the sport of boxing. Far from it. Far from it. Al Heyman's not involved in this fight. Right? Think about it. This is a WBC heavyweight elimination match. He's not involved in this fight. Let's talk about the managers who are. You have Patrick Thomas. Remember that name. He's a boxing manager out of Ireland. Right? Ireland is, if you don't know, a hotbed for boxing. He's the manager for Mike Perez. And of course, for Bryant Jennings, you have James Prince and Josh Dubin. Right? Understand, this is not the first time Bryant Jennings has fought at Madison Square Garden. Right? His fight against Artur Spolenka was at Madison Square Garden as well. Understand, Madison Square Garden used to be known as the Mecca of boxing. Right? It's a showcase. Lately, you've been hearing about other venues in the tri-state area, notably the Barclays Center. Understand, Barclays is new to the party. The party has gone on for decades before that. Understand, Ali Frazier won. One of the most important fights in boxing history took place at Madison Square Garden. Understand, Sergio Martinez, Miguel Cotto just took place at Madison Square Garden. So you're talking about promoters other than the 2 or 3 who are often in the public limelight, and managers other than Al Heyman, who's often confused with Showtime Boxing or Golden Boy Promotions. Right? You're talking about a big event that doesn't involve either of them. Right? You know, Al Heyman's not involved, nor are big-time promoters who seem to dominate the Las Vegas scene. Understand, Las Vegas is just one town. There are others in which boxing is huge. Right? Now let's talk about the fight itself. I believe the blueprint on this fight can be found in the 6th round of Mike Perez's fight against a heavyweight you need to know about. In fact, this fight is as much about this heavyweight as the 2 guys fighting, and that's Carlos Takam. Right? Let me just say, Takam or Takem, however you want to pronounce it, is an elite heavyweight. He's the guy who just got a draw against Mike Perez. Right? Perez is unbeaten except for the draw that he had in his last fight. Now that fight was going Perez's way. He was looking good in the fight. Then we get to the 6th round. And in that 6th round, Carlos Takam, who strikes me as really more of an ambush fighter, decides to do something ambush fighters don't typically do. He invites himself to dinner. He comes inside, he puts a shoulder on Mike Perez, and he stays there. If you want to see what putting a shoulder on a guy is all about, right? Coming inside and staying inside. I want you to look at the 6th round of Perez against Carlos Takam. Understand, it changes the fight. Takam is inside, he's hiding his head, he's going to the body. Perez, in my opinion, had few answers. Right then, of course, Takam starts throwing chopping shots up top. What made it interesting was Perez is wide open for uppercuts, then he's wide open for the wide chopping shots. Now, Bryant Jennings is interesting. Right? Bryant Jennings can handle a pressure fighter. We saw that when he fought Andrei Fedosov. He's also a guy who can throw combinations on the inside. We saw that in the same fight. Now, what this fight, in my opinion, really comes down to, and it'll sound a bit bizarre, but it's really going to be the placement of the fighters. Jennings does have a good jab. More importantly, Jennings has an 84-inch reach. 84 inches. That's long, folks. He's the taller man, but he has the longer reach too. Right? Understand that Perez has a short reach for a heavyweight. So I believe if Bryant Jennings can keep the distance between the two fighters anything other than mid-range, in other words, if he can stay outside, pop a jab, be busy with the jab, keep Mike Perez at the end of the jab, and it's easier said than done because Perez is a southpaw. Right? But if he can just keep Perez outside on a jab, he should be able to bank rounds. Right? And of course, if he's not way outside, using a reach advantage to hit Perez where Perez can't hit him, then, like Carlos Takam, I believe Bryant Jennings can get inside. But he has to be all the way inside. And he needs to put a shoulder on Mike Perez, lean on him, and go to work. Right now, Bryant Jennings, as those who watched the Arthur Splinka fight know, landed some great uppercuts in that fight. Right? It seems to me that Mike Perez is a little bit open for uppercuts inside. Also, if there are doubts about either fighter's preparation, those doubts would really have to be about Mike Perez. Because these two guys were supposed to fight a few months ago. And Perez had an injured shoulder. Also, because of visa issues, Perez had to do most of his training in Europe. Right? So he's not even domestic here, close to the scene of the fight. Let me add another wrinkle, and I think it's a significant wrinkle. Perez has had to change trainers. Right? Abel Sanchez, you remember him. He's the trainer for middleweight champion Gennady Golovkin. Was Perez's trainer. For this fight, Perez is going with Adam Booth. Now, I think Adam Booth is great at having fighters who are outside the pocket. Stay outside. Think David Haye. Right? One of the reasons why David Haye's face doesn't look too marked up, even though he's in his 30s, is because David Haye is not inside throwing elbows, leaning with the shoulder on his opponent. Haye's an ambush fighter. He's outside, then he flashes inside with power shots. The only time he's going to stay inside is if he hurts you. Right? Think about that Enzo Maccarinelli fight. Right? Adam Booth with Mike Perez, I'm not sure if Adam Booth or Mike Perez is going to know how to deal with combination throwing Bryant Jennings if Jennings comes inside and decides to lean on Mike Perez. If it's at mid-range, Mike Perez probably has the advantage. At long range or short range, I have to go with Bryant Jennings. Let's talk about other factors. And don't get me wrong, this is a close fight. Right? You really have to be a risk taker. Fool around with this fight. Right? But let's talk mentally for a second. You're Mike Perez. You had a fight just last year against Magomed Abusalamov. Right? Where your opponent had his life at risk after the fight. Was in a coma in the hospital. You ended, at a minimum, that opponent's boxing career. There are lawsuits arising out of the beating Magomed took in that fight. He's making a comeback. God bless him. He's doing a little bit better now. But you're a professional fighter and you know you took away that guy's career. Right? As Ray Robinson once said, right, this is the hurt business. Right? The business of fighters is to get the other guy in trouble. Right? But understand there's an emotional cost. You know, the great Emil Griffin, after the Benny the Kid Parrott fight, where Parrott died, never kicked on the gas after that. Wasn't the same finisher that he was before that fight. By the way, look up boxing history. You're going to see the same thing happen to Ezzard Charles. I believe he roughed up a guy in the ring, was never the same afterwards. Right? People felt that Ezzard Charles wasn't as aggressive at the end of fights after that. There's a question on whether that's going to happen to Mike Perez. Understand, the only fight he had since then ended in a draw. So to sum up, I like Bryant Jennings' chances here. Right? It's a close fight between two unbeaten fighters. But I think Bryant Jennings, who didn't have the hurt shoulder during training, who hasn't changed trainers in the last few months, who's not coming off of a draw in which he faded in the second half of the fight. And keep in mind, that Perez-Carlos Tecum fight was a 10-round fight. This is a 12-round fight. Right? I like Bryant Jennings in this one. I agree it's close. It's very important that all of us here online hear from you. Let's get different views. These are two unbeaten fighters. You've heard my take. Let me hear yours. Let's discuss it. Keep in mind, the goal here is not for me to be right. The goal is for all of us to try to get an edge on the casino. So please leave your comments in the comment section to this video. Thanks for stopping by.